All right, so you want to be a detective, huh? That's pretty cool, actually. It's one of those jobs you don't really hear a lot about, like what they actually do day to day.
Yeah, definitely a lot of mystery surrounding it.
Totally. So we're going to take a deep dive into what it really takes to be a detective, and we're going way beyond like the basic job description stuff.
And lucky for us, you found some really great resources for this one,
Yeah, for this deep dive, we're looking at RoleCatcher.
which seems like kind of a one-stop shop for like all things career advice.
Seriously, they've got it all. Career guides, interview tips, even AI to help you fix up your resume.
No kidding.
But before we get into like how to actually land the job, let's unpack what RoleCatcher says about like actually being a detective on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, because it's probably not all.
Yeah, is it like all the movies and TV shows?
Right. Is it all like car chases and interrogations? One thing that stood out to me from like right off the bat reading this career guide
Oh yeah.
was how much they emphasized like gathering and compiling evidence. And it just, it makes you realize how much goes into like the documentation side of things, you know?
Which you never really see in the movies.
Never.
It's always like they find one thing and then they're like, aha, solved it.
Exactly. But every fingerprint,
Mm-hmm.
every witness statement, like every single thing needs to be like meticulously recorded.
Like build the case.
Yes. To prove it in court.
So it's less about like Sherlock Holmes deductions and more about just building a case.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where that whole chain of custody thing comes in, making sure that every piece of evidence is accounted for, like from the crime scene all the way to the courtroom.
Which makes sense because you don't want anything tampered with.
Exactly.
You need that clear paper trail.
Exactly.
But it's not all pen and paper anymore, is it? I mean, RoleCatcher mentions things like digital forensics and DNA analysis.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Especially for someone like you who's like, pretty tech savvy.
Right. I mean, think about it. DNA analysis has like totally changed the game. Not only solving crimes, but like also clearing innocent people who were wrongfully convicted before like we had this technology.
It's crazy.
Like something out of science fiction.
It really is.
But it's real now.
It is real now. What about the digital forensics part? Like, what kind of impact has that had?
Well, I mean, just think about how much we do online these days.
Oh my gosh.
Our entire lives are online.
Pretty much.
So digital forensics is basically like following that trail,
Interesting.
uncovering evidence that criminals might not even realize they're leaving behind.
Oh, wow. So even if like a crime happens in the real world,
Right.
it's the digital world that might hold the key.
Often.
That's wild. But I imagine it's got to be tough for detectives to keep up with all like the new technologies and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It definitely adds another layer of complexity.
Mm.
Criminals are always finding new ways to use technology to do bad things.
Yeah.
So detectives basically have to constantly be learning new software, understanding new platforms. It's like a digital arms race.
Wow. So it's not just about understanding the law anymore. You got to be like a tech expert.
You have to be like a tech wizard on top of everything else.
And I imagine there's still that human element, like working with different people and stuff.
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, RoleCatcher mentions working with, courtrooms and like other law enforcement agencies.
It's very collaborative.
Extremely.
You're not just like a lone wolf out there.
Right. It takes a team. And the guide also talks about cooperating with other police departments, too.
Wow. So it's like multi-level.
It really is a huge team effort.
Interesting.
And, I mean, that just highlights how important communication and teamwork are in this job.
Oh, totally. Like you might be working with forensic specialists one day and then interviewing witnesses the next, and then you have to go present your findings to lawyers and judges.
Exactly. And you need to be able to, like, explain things clearly to all these different people.
So they understand.
Right.
Wow, so it sounds like being a detective is about way more than just solving puzzles.
Way more.
It's like you need to be a skilled communicator, you got to navigate the legal system, and then on top of all that, you have to build relationships with people from all walks of life.
You hit the nail on the head. It is not a job for everyone.
Not at all.
You need a very particular set of skills and like a real willingness to constantly learn and adapt.
It's always evolving.
Constantly.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of skills.
Oh, you're reading my mind. Okay, let's talk about those essential detective skills, because I feel like there's more to it than meets the eye. So we've talked about the evidence, the technology, but what of the detective themselves? What does RoleCatcher say it takes to, actually be good at this job?
Well, get ready for some curveballs, because some of the top skills they list might surprise you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they put a huge emphasis on reading comprehension, critical thinking, and active listening.
Ah, interesting.
They even rank those higher than, like, chemistry.
Wow. I would thought, like, a scientific mind would be, like, essential.
You'd think, right.
Yeah.
But RoleCatcher's emphasizing something else entirely.
Like a different kind of intelligence?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not just about like the physical evidence.
No, it's about being able to process tons of information, like all those reports, witness statements, forensic analysis,
Yeah, because there's a lot of paperwork.
mountains of it.
Yeah.
So you need strong reading comprehension just to get through it all, let alone figure out what it means.
Right, and then you got to connect the dots.
Exactly.
Okay, what about active listening? I always picture detectives like grilling suspects.
Of course, but it's not just about the questions you ask.
It's about how you listen to the answers.
Exactly. You have to pick up on those little cues,
Yeah.
what's not being said, the body language, all of that.
So you can create a space where people feel comfortable telling the truth.
Yes. Building trust is huge.
So it's almost like detective work starts with understanding how people work.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's where those degrees in sociology and psychology come in.
Oh, right. RoleCatcher mentioned those.
Yeah, it's not enough to just know the law.
Yeah.
You got to understand why people do what they do.
That's so interesting. I never would have thought of that.
It's like human nature is its own crime scene.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I always thought those subjects were kind of like theoretical,
Oh.
not something you'd actually use in a job like this.
Right. But think about it. Every crime involves people, victims, perpetrators, witnesses.
Yeah, true.
And understanding those relationships, the power dynamics, even just reading body language, those are all valuable tools for a detective.
So it's like you're piecing together a puzzle, but the pieces are people.
Exactly. And that's where the real detective work comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Making those connections, seeing the patterns that others might miss.
That's gotta be tough.
It takes a keen eye.
And I bet a lot of that you can't learn from a textbook.
Oh, definitely not. It's more of a learn by doing kind of thing.
Which is where that on-the-job training comes in.
Right. RoleCatcher talks about shadowing, senior detectives getting experience in different departments.
So you get a taste of everything.
It's about taking that book knowledge and turning it into real-world skills.
Yeah. Kind of like a crash course in street smarts.
Exactly. You can read all about how to ride a bike, but until you actually get on one.
You'll never learn.
Exactly. On-the-job training is where you hone those instincts. You learn to think on your feet, make those split-second decisions that no textbook can teach you.
That makes a lot of sense. But to even get to that point, you gotta nail the interview right. And it sounds like RoleCatcher had some pretty interesting advice on that front, too. So you've got the skills, you've put in the work, but how do you actually land the job? Like, convince a police department that you're the right person to be a detective. I imagine that interview process is pretty rigorous.
Oh, you bet it is. And RoleCatcher actually pointed out something that I thought was really interesting. They're saying that recruitment is becoming more and more automated.
That's kind of scary, actually. It's like
Yeah.
you have to pass a robot test before you even get to a real person.
That's a great way to put it. A lot of police departments are using these things called applicant tracking systems, or ATS.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of those.
They basically scan your resume for certain keywords to see if you're even a good fit.
Wow, so it's like having a computer decide your fate before a human even looks at your application.
Pretty much. And that's why RoleCatcher really emphasizes tailoring your resume to each specific job you apply for.
Oh, that makes sense. You got to speak their language.
Exactly. You need to highlight those skills and experiences that match the keywords they're looking for.
It makes you wonder if those resume building websites are worth it.
They might be. But let's say you make it past the robots. Now you've got the real challenge, the actual interview with real people.
Right, because that human element is a whole other thing.
Totally. And RoleCatcher had a ton of example interview questions that they said are common. And let me tell you, some of them were tough.
Oh, really? Like what?
One that stuck out to me was about handling a conflict with a superior, like if you disagreed with their orders or something.
Ooh, that's a tough one. You can't exactly tell your boss they're wrong.
Exactly. It's a delicate situation. So they're looking for someone who can handle that kind of pressure and still be professional.
Can you stand your ground but also respect the chain of command?
Exactly. And not just that, they want to see if you can communicate effectively under pressure. Can you explain your reasoning clearly and calmly, even if you're feeling stressed?
It's almost like they're testing your personality as much as your skills.
Oh, for sure. It all goes back to those core skills we talked about: active listening, communicating clearly, thinking critically, even when you're in a tough spot.
Wow. It really is amazing how those skills apply to so many different aspects of the job.
It reminds me of another thing RoleCatcher mentioned: being honest with yourself about whether you're really cut out for this line of work.
Right. It's not all glamorous crime solving.
Not at all. We're talking long hours, high-pressure situations, and dealing with the emotional toll of seeing the worst of humanity.
It takes a certain kind of person to handle all that.
It really does.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of detectives. RoleCatcher gave us a lot to think about.
For sure. It's definitely not your average desk job, that's for sure.
It seems like to be successful, you need more than just the right qualifications. It takes a certain mindset, a passion for justice, and a willingness to face some really tough realities.
It's a challenging path, but also incredibly rewarding if you're up for it.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but hopefully this has given all you aspiring detectives out there some food for thought.
And maybe even inspired you to check out RoleCatcher and do some more research.
Exactly. So until next time, keep exploring those career paths, and remember, it's never too late to chase your dreams.
Yeah.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.